Where is Allah when the Ummah hurts? This is a common query raised by observers of the suffering in Gaza and Palestine, contrasting their doubt with the steadfast faith of those directly affected. Hey everyone, it's Cleophie again from Cleophie Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We've noticed that our largest audience comes from India, so we've decided to offer the podcast in Hindi and Urdu. It's not about dubbing audio. Actually, it is a separate podcast in the Urdu and Hindi languages. You can find the link in the video description. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, let's move to the next segment, which is a deep dive with Jack and Wilson. And please hit like and subscribe if you want to help us spread the word around the globe. Hey, Jack and Wilson, it's all yours.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a subject that is profoundly difficult, intensely spiritual, and it's one that is just echoing across global headlines right now. It's the question, maybe the most profound question asked by anyone observing mass suffering. Where is God in all of this?
It's a natural question.
Yeah.
A very human question. And what's fascinating here is how the source material reframes it. We're deep diving into excerpts from a faith-based exploration of suffering and, well, divine presence, specifically around the crises in Gaza and Palestine. And the material, it immediately isolates who's actually asking that question.
Right. It suggests that the question, where is God, it's primarily being asked by those of us watching the events unfold, not the people who are actually enduring the suffering directly.
That contrast is the anchor of this entire deep dive. It really is. You'd expect the deepest devastation to lead to the greatest doubt, but the source opens with a story that shows the complete opposite.
It's the story of a Palestinian mother. She had just lost her child. And while you might expect, screaming or just a complete breakdown, she describes being about to scream. But then an inner voice prompted her to say a specific prayer. To Allah we belong and to Allah we return. And then she followed this by stating with total certainty that her son died immediately, that he didn't feel the pain.
That certainty, that immediate connection to some kind of divine knowledge is critical. The source connects that mother's ability to remain anchored to the idea that the divine presence is subtle with those he loves. The greater the piety, the more clearly one can perceive his power and presence, even when the external reality is pure devastation. For the onlooker, the suggestion is that the fog of our own comfort or distance, it sort of accumulates on the heart, and it makes that perception really difficult.
Wait, okay, so if the clarity of vision is tied to piety, does that imply the rest of us, the onlookers asking, where is God, are somehow being judged for our lack of piety? I mean, that feels like a pretty harsh implication.
I think it's less a judgment and more an observation on perception. When you are struggling for basic survival, your heart is purified of all the other concerns, the worldly concerns. When you're living in abundance, it's just harder to see beyond the immediate material world. Her piety didn't save her child's life, but it gave her the strength to recognize the divine plan in that exact moment of loss.
So the mission of this deep dive, then, is to try and lend some of that clarity to the onlooker. We have to move beyond just witnessing the present trauma and place this suffering into a broader context of time, specifically the end times and the ultimate day of judgment.
Precisely. When we look at the verse, Master the Day of Judgment, Maliki Yawm al-Din, it reminds us that God's majesty, his ultimate mastery, is present in this worldly life, of course.
Oh.
But on the Day of Judgment, it will be so undeniably apparent that absolutely everyone, the oppressors, the oppressed, the believers, the disbelievers, everyone will acknowledge it. The problem for us is that we want to see that final, undeniable display of majesty right now.
Right in the middle of history.
Exactly.
That desire for immediate definitive closure is what confuses our perception. Let's look at a prophetic example of arrogance, where the response was definitive and immediate, just to see what the ultimate end of history looks like.
We're moving to the extreme example of arrogance in the last days, as mentioned by the prophet. The coming out of Gog and Magog.
Who are described as this destructive force, just wreaking havoc across the earth. The story really captures the height of human arrogance, just intoxicated by their own power.
I mean, they reach a level of self-exaltation where they believe they have successfully killed everyone on earth.
Yeah.
But that's not enough for them. They have to complete their dominion.
They actually throw their arrows toward the sky, literally believing they can kill everyone in the heavens, too. That act of defying the divine is it's the ultimate display of hubris.
And this is where the subtlety of the divine response is so fascinating. God doesn't immediately strike them down with some, visible cosmic power. Instead, the arrows are caused to return with traces of blood. And this, just temporarily, it fuels their delusion. They shout, "We succeeded, we've conquered the heavens."
So they are given just a brief, temporary confirmation of their own delusional self-importance. It allows their arrogance to peak.
Yes. But then comes the swift, absolute, and almost humbling end. God sends an incredibly tiny specific parasite, the kind that lives in the noses of sheep, which instantaneously kills every single member of this supposedly strongest force on Earth. The most fragile life form wipes out the ultimate tyrant.
And what follows is a rapid, immediate restoration.
Exactly. Jesus and his followers, who were sheltering on a mountain, they confirm the deaths. Then we have this immediate heavenly interaction. Massive birds are sent to clear the rotting corpses. Then Jesus prays for rain, a simple act of supplication, and the rain comes immediately, cleaning the earth.
And the earth is commanded to immediately restore its blessings, yielding unprecedented abundance.
And the key takeaway here is this. In those last days, the connection and response between the heavens and the earth is immediate. It's rapid, and it's undeniable. Both the oppressor and the righteous perceive God's action instantly. It is a moment of consequence without delay.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we have to compare that immediate, spectacular intervention with historical moments where intervention was decidedly not immediate. And this helps us understand why divine timing is such a profound test for the onlooker.
This contrast is foundational to understanding the source material's argument about trial versus protection.
Yes. Let's look at two contrasting incidents involving the Kaaba, the most sacred site in Islam. They show divine action is not uniform. Incident A, protection. This is the year of the elephant. Abraha attempts to destroy the Kaaba with his army. There were no believers protecting it at that moment. God sends the birds with stones to protect the house. The message is crystal clear. The house has a Lord that will protect it.
Absolute immediate protection. Delivered visibly and dramatically, it cemented that lesson for generations.
Now, contrast that with Incident B, martyrdom. Less than 100 years later, a pivotal figure named Abdullah ibn Zubair is firebombed and crucified while praying in front of the Kaaba by another tyrant's army.
Okay, and here's the crucial contrast for the onlookers. The source emphasizes that neither Abdullah nor his mother, who witnessed the tragedy, asked the question we hear today: where was God? They were prepared for martyrdom, their spiritual clarity was absolute.
But the people watching this sacred space burn and a righteous man die, they were deeply shaken. The source highlights that one of the earliest theological deviations or major trials fitna in Islamic history arose directly from this suffering.
That's right. A specific theological group seized on the suffering of Ibn Zubair to cast doubt on the divine decree among the onlookers. They argued if God knew this was going to happen, he would have stopped it. They were trying to manipulate that very human emotion of witnessing suffering to undermine certainty in God's ultimate plan.
And that trial of delayed justice became absolutely horrific centuries later with the Qarmations.
This was, arguably one of the darkest days in Islamic history. 930 CE. A man named Abu Tahir al-Janabi massacres 20,000 pilgrims during the Hajj, piles their bodies in the holy well of Zamzam, and steals the black stone for 20 years.
And his arrogance, it mirrored that of Gog and Magog. He stood there challenging God's previous intervention, yelling, "Where are those so-called birds? Where are these so-called stones?"
The audacity of the act and the fact that there was no immediate Abraha-style divine retribution, that was the massive trial for that entire generation. They watched the Hajj just cease for 2 decades. The wisdom of God's timeline, according to the source, is this. The trial comes to believers who already have internal clarity. They must know God is present and will enact his justice, but on his time, not ours.
For the 20,000 martyrs in 930 CE, their suffering was instantly over. They immediately transitioned to their reward. They knew the promise was true.
Their problem was solved. The problem was for the onlooker, the one who demands an immediate, visible military victory. The psychological burden of delayed justice is so much heavier on the comfortable witness than on the victim who has attained certainty.
Which brings us directly to the present situation. When current oppressors, the leaders of the Israeli occupation forces and defense ministers, when they speak with pride, confidence, and arrogance, even mocking the scripture of the believers, it powerfully echoes the historical tyrants we just discussed.
It creates that recognizable pattern. And the source offers what it calls the glad tidings, the bishara. This extreme level of arrogance and perceived immunity is historically a sign that their end is near, and that God is allowing them to reach their psychological breaking point before the inevitable collapse.
So the arrogance itself is a sign of impending divine action, even if the timeline is, well, frustrating for us to watch. This reframes the entire purpose of the trial. It is a sign for the believers watching, a test of patience, not a sign of abandonment.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the crucial divergence in perception. The outsider asking, where is God, versus the behavior of the people in Gaza.
The insight drawn from the sources is stunning. The people enduring the worst of cruelty show the least instances of apostasy or questioning God's wisdom.
They possess a conviction that provides an internal happiness and peace that, the source suggests, kings would fight to extract from them. That certainty outweighs the worst physical destruction. If they are in the darkest place, yet their faith is strongest, then their perception of divine presence must be different from ours.
So the people in Gaza are not asking, where is God?
The source is emphatic on this point. They perceive God's presence during the airstrikes, the hunger, the tears. They feel the absence of something else entirely. They are asking, where are you?
Meaning, the 2 billion strong global community, the Muslim leaders, the military, the economic strength.
Yes. They are asking where the rest of the body of the followers of the prophet is. They acknowledge that God has tested them mightily, but the perceived failure is external in the response of humanity. And this becomes the profound call to reflection for you, for the listener. Where were you?
That reframing, it forces us to look inward at our own inaction, which is perhaps harder than simply questioning the divine. Let's talk about the emotional state the source describes that allows the people there to cope. The power of combining contradictory states.
It's the highest level of spiritual mastery. It's a depth of spiritual life that is often inaccessible to those of us living in comfort.
The doctor's story shared in the source is the perfect encapsulation. He lost 72 family members in Gaza, 72, yet he made the distinction. We are not hopeless, even when we feel helpless.
That is the believer's state, the ability to embrace the feeling of brokenness and utter helplessness before God, while simultaneously maintaining full certainty and conviction, Yaqeen in his ultimate power and plan. You accept your incapacity without accepting the finality of defeat.
And we see that same combination of desperation and certainty in the ultimate parallel drawn to the prophet himself.
Look at the Battle of Badr. The prophet made supplication to Allah all night with such desperation that his cloak fell off. He was fearing that if that small group of believers was killed, God would no longer be worshipped on earth. To an outsider, that desperation looks like the brink of collapse.
But it wasn't despair.
No. It was total humility combined with absolute certainty. Just as earlier, when he was hiding in the cave with his companion Abu Bakr and said, "Do not grieve, Allah is with us." The prophet possessed more certainty in that moment that God would fulfill his promise than anyone else alive. He combined the feeling of desperation and brokenness with the absolute conviction of victory.
So, for the listener, the final call to action is a refocusing of faith. Are you seeing divine presence reflected in the internal strength and resilience of the people of Gaza, that unbreakable spirit in the face of destruction? Or are you only seeing an absence of justice in the supposed temporary strength of the oppressor?
It truly is a perception issue that has to be resolved in the heart. The external reality is only half the story.
So what does this all mean? The core learning from our sources is that the greatest challenge to faith is not the suffering itself, but the delay and the perception of the comfortable onlooker. Divine protection and victory, they often appear on a timeline that defies human expectation. But the ultimate end for the arrogant is assured. That temporary arrogance will be silenced completely when God declares, "I am the king," on the day of judgment.
And for us, those outside the direct conflict, the source material urges us to refocus on what we can do now. Intense supplication, using our voice, challenging injustice from within our own positions. We must draw strength from the people who refuse to be hopeless.
We have to be active in our anticipation.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with a final thought for deeper exploration, drawing from the source material's call for active preparedness. Think of Nureddin Zengi, who was the predecessor of Saladin. He built the intricate wooden pulpit, the minbar, for Jerusalem before it was even recaptured by the Muslims during the Crusades.
So he prepared the symbol of victory and restoration before the battle for that city was even won.
He prepared the symbol of victory and restoration before the battle for that city was won. That is the mentality we're being called to adopt. The provocative thought for you is this. Have you already picked out your minbar? Have you prepared your contribution and conviction for the inevitable victory, even if the signs of that victory are not yet physically apparent to the naked eye?
To refuse to see only broken buildings and instead see only unbreakable people.
We must trust God's promise that the signs pointing toward the ultimate restoration of that blessed area are like seeing the bricks already being put together. Your faith is tested by the delay, not by the promise. Make your supplication, draw strength from the people who are not hopeless, and remember that the divine is close, hearing the prayer of every single person.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. I hope you've gained some valuable insights. If you're a truth seeker, yearning for divine light and ready to step out of darkness, now is your moment. The truth is that Allah is the one and only creator of the universe. He has sent over 124,000 messengers and prophets to guide humanity, starting with Adam and culminating with the final messenger, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them all. If you resonate with this message, you might be ready to embrace Islam. Simply recite the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. For further support, feel free to join our WhatsApp group. You can send us a private message there. The link is in the video description. Don't wait until it's too late. We look forward to connecting with you soon.